Hello and welcome back to Strange Stories with the Seeker and the Skeptic. Today we are speaking with Elizabeth Lord. Elizabeth is a writer and student of parapsychology. She works with the Rhine Research Center, where their goal is to bridge the gap between science and spirituality. Welcome to the show, Elizabeth. Thank you so much for being here with us today.
Thank you. It's such a pleasure to be here.
Absolutely. So you describe yourself as a student of parapsychology. So tell us exactly what is parapsychology?
The difference between parapsychology and paranormal is that parapsychology basically studies certain aspects of the paranormal. It started about 135 or 137 years ago uh, in the UK. So they had the UK Society for Psychical Research about that time frame. And whereas they were doing a whole lot of field research through the mediums, so people who can contact discarnates or people who claim to be dead, either through trance, which is they can embody the medium and then come out with their own voice and their own, patterns basically, or the medium can see them in the room. And then there were also physical mediums where things like apports, things just appeared on the table, or table tipping, the things you hear about, things moving around in the room. So it started with that as field research. And then it went into the laboratory with J.B. Rhine in Durham, North Carolina, through the Duke Psychology Department, where he brought it into the laboratory. Those Zener cards that you see in Ghostbusters, those were
Mhm.
started by J.B. Rhine. And he basically started off as a botanist along with his wife, Louisa, but they brought the stuff into the laboratory to give scientists a little bit more comfort that this is a phenomenon that occurs naturally in just about everybody. So from about the 1930s on, the Rhine has been studying in the laboratory these effects. Now, specifically, there's telepathy, which is mind-to-mind interaction. There's the mediumship is still being studied by the Windbridge Institute for the most part. There's also precognition, which is we know something's going to happen before it happens. Clairvoyance is got a broad range of effects. It's sort of like something's going on. And I think you interviewed your mother, John, where she knew Leviticus. That's clairvoyance. So there's clairaudience where you hear something and you could smell something, you could feel something, you can taste something, and it's not present. So you can kind of pick up that something's going on. Um, Psychokinesis. We have somebody who comes to the Rhine all the time named Ed Edwards. I don't know if you're familiar with him, but he's an incredible guy. He can move stuff, and you just can't believe he's doing it, but he's just incredibly good at it. But he's like the
Wow.
epitome of a hillbilly. Just love him to death. Um, so uh, the one thing, those are the things that the Rhine studies. We don't
Mhm.
really study so much UFOs. We don't really study the biological creatures too much,
Mhm.
unless they have some sort of effect like telepathy or something like that. Which is interesting because a lot of the UFO effects, a lot of the Bigfoot experiences also involve the discarnates or people who claim to be dead. So it's interesting that crossover. Um, the most recent thing that the Rhine has been studying is something called remote viewing. It started with the Stanford Research Institute in California, late 80s, early 90s, where they created a process of this clairvoyance. Ingo Swann, being a artist in New York, developed it as something of a more visual kind of way of doing things. But they wanted to know, the government wanted to know how you could teach people clairvoyance. So this process became remote viewing. Basically, they go into a room, they're given very little information, maybe a set of coordinates from a map, and they're asked to find out what's there, be it a human or something like that. Or early on, the way SRI did it is they would send somebody somewhere randomly, and then when they came back, they would look at the notes and see if it matched. So a remote viewer would look at something like called the signal line, which is basically I'm going to attach to something that gives me this information. And then I'm going to draw, I'm going to write down descriptives, I'm going to take down how it makes me feel. I'm going to turn around and look at it from a different perspective. And that's how they would do it. And be pages and pages of notes. Then the person would come back, another person would look it over and say, okay, where'd you go? And they would explain it. And they would take a look at the notes and say, yeah, there's a lot of hits here. Hits are, did you get it right? Um, so one of the most fascinating remote viewing things they did was the silver market. And the silver market has up a lot, up a little, down a lot, down a little. And they would take an item in the broker's office, like a pencil cup or a pancake or stapler, very different items. And the broker decided which those would symbolize. The remote viewer would say, well, I feel like there's something, smells sort of like syrup. It's kind of floppy and it tastes good. Okay, so it was the pancake. So the broker would say, oh, the pancake means down a lot. So they would put the money in based on that evaluation, and 10 out of 10 times, 100%, they hit the silver market. So that's telling us that remote viewing, this being associative remote viewing, is very effective and people use it a lot right now. And it's being studied by a lot of researchers in parapsychology.
That is all very fascinating. What are some of the things that they've kind of uncovered with this research? What are some conclusions that they've made, or is still kind of very open?
So we've always thought that it takes somebody with talent to show psychic ability, but what J.B. Rhine and other researchers wanted to show is that everybody has some level of it. So I like to use the baseball analogy or the basketball analogy. Just about everybody will eventually hit the ball with the bat, just about. Now, your level of ability is whether you're going to hit it out of the park and how often. So we have the batting average, right? So a batting average, a good batting average is somewhere around 400, 500 hits per thousand. So if you imagine that a good psychic would be about like that, but slightly above that, about 600 hits at bat per 1,000. That's about where psychics are. And we see that we do an evaluation of what it would be if it was random. So if you threw dice and you're trying to hit sixes all the time and you do it 15 times, about 7 times out of 15 would be what you would consider randomly possible. So anything above that would be considered psychokinetic. Way above that, somewhere in the 12 to 15 range, you're very talented like that. And if you can do it multiple times, then we've got a psychokinetic. So you could say Ed Edwards is like that. So for a precog, you would try to look at the cards before a viewer looks at them. So you'd write down, okay, I got a star, I got a waving line, I got, the I forget all the different scenery cards, but you'd mark them all down, and then the viewer would look at them and say, "Oh yeah, I got that right. I got that right. I got that right." So if you get a lot of them out of the total number, then you look like you've got that skill set. And a lot of people don't even realize that they have something they're good at because it's so intuitive, so subliminal for the most part. Don't even realize they're tapping into that sort of aspect of their ability until they actually practice it. So at the Rhine, we have something called the Psi Games. People come in just for fun. It's like a party. And we play these different games of clairvoyance, precognition, telepathy, psychokinesis, and remote viewing. And they say, oh my gosh, I can't believe how well I did on one of these aspects. So what Ryan showed was, hey, this is in the general population. And I wonder why isn't it so strong? And I said, well, the people I've met, like your sister, for instance, who has, it kind of messes with your life if it
Mm-hmm.
interferes too much, right? So we think that it's reached a kind of an equilibrium within the human population of not being terribly strong, but just strong enough, sort of like I get a terrible feeling my child just fell off his bicycle somewhere in the middle of the street. I'm going to go run and find him, basically, kind of thing. So that's where we're thinking it is. I think I answered your question pretty well there.
Oh, definitely.
Okay.
Does the research show that people have the ability, just like you were talking about, like with baseball? Obviously, people have kind of maybe some natural skill, but with practice, they get better. Is that the similar with these abilities?
Yes. If people want to develop psi, they can. And what we found is that the brain is not where this actually originates. Believe it or not, we think it's the mind. Okay. Two separate entities. And we feel like the brain works at a certain wavelength when it's being analytical, when it's working within the world, trying to pay your bills, you're trying to drive your car. But the minute you get into, I believe it's an alpha wave state, you might want to correct me if I'm wrong. You're relaxed. You're not thinking about anything really very much at all. You're kind of in an almost meditative state. That's when intuition hits you. That's when this inspiration hits you. That's when the ideas come to you. And maybe you say to yourself, hey, I think Martha's going to call me in a few minutes. And lo and behold, there's Martha on the phone. So it's a, as I said, a subliminal state. Subliminal in neuroscience means unaware area. So it doesn't come to the executive part of the brain, the awareness part of the brain, until it matters to you. It's sort of along the lines of, well, that dream I had the night before, I'm not really thinking about it much. It was kind of a different kind of dream. It seemed really realistic and it kind of bothered me a little bit. You forget about it. And 2 weeks later, aspects of that dream come true on the news, for instance, or you recognize it and it just sort of feels like a deja vu moment, things like that.
Yeah, that's super interesting. If you've got people who are exhibiting these types of things in those percentages, I mean, for what it's worth in Major League Baseball, if you bat 333 is a 30% of what's pitched at you, that's a good um that's major leagues. So if you've got people going 75% of the time, I mean, the average person on Zinner cards should be able to do about 25% of the deck. They should be able to, like, you give them a 25 card test. The average person, the average human is going to be right 1/4 of the time, 25%. So anyone who's 50% or above, I would consider to be really up there, honestly. Have you ever heard of Mitch Horowitz? Do you know who that is?
Yes.
Yeah.
He came to one of our events in Durham before COVID and spoke with us, and he's been a big supporter of the Rhine. I actually got to meet him, and he's more into the esoteric spiritualism. So it's the history of uh, of that arena more than he's involved with the actual research of parapsychology.
Sure, that is true. But also in multiple of his books, he's mentioned the Rhine multiple times. He's
Yes,
pretty vocally in support of the stuff you folks are doing out there for sure. And
he
that's actually
most
where
definitely
I
is.
initially had heard of what you're talking about with those folks and
Mhm.
the discrepancy in what people think about this inner card thing, all that stuff.
Mhm.
So that's definitely within my realm of things that I find to be interesting for sure. Cooley and got to meet him. He seems like a cool guy. I've interacted with him a little bit online.
He is a very good speaker and a really nice gentleman. I really didn't get a whole lot of time to speak with him personally, but what I got to see, I enjoyed, and I've read a couple of his books. So
Awesome. How did you get involved in all this?
um, I've been a student of afterlife philosophy since I was a teenager and wondered, well, if babies die, what's the point? I mean, you can't just go to heaven and that's that, right? So I followed religion, different religions, Catholicism. I went to Church of Nazarene, Methodist Church, several different, Assemblies of God, uh, good Lord, all of those. And I couldn't find the answers there. And eventually I had to leave the church for multiple reasons. But I embraced Taoism. And I don't know how much you know of Taoism. It's the anti-religion philosophy. You just don't want to have to follow everybody else's idea, but pick and choose what you will from it that from the for the time of your life. I was between jobs. I had been laid off from one job and looking for something similar. And I decided to start writing stories while I was out of work to keep myself occupied. I said, well, I want to write this thriller about psychometry. Psychometry is when you touch an object and get impressions about the object. So this woman is holding a bracelet, and she gets this idea of another young lady who's being chased through her office building, and she thinks she's just about to get out the door, and suddenly somebody grabs her and slices her throat, and she dies with that bracelet on her wrist, and she's staring at that bracelet as she passes away. And that was the first chapter. I said, oh yeah, I need to learn more about psychometry. How am I going to do that? Well, the Rhine Research has an open Wednesday research meeting at 3 o'clock, and I said, oh, I'll just walk in there if it's open, and I'll ask these people about some books about psychometry. So I sat down with them, and you can imagine I'm sitting amongst PhDs, people who've been researching for 30, 40 years. And here I am, off the street. And they were so wonderful to me. I said, forgive me for asking a stupid question, but what are you talking about? And they would explain it to me. They were actually very happy to kind of bring somebody in and explain it in a way that I could understand. And I realized this whole rich world behind it. And I said, well, this is kind of cool. And then I read more books and more white papers and watch these experiments and participate in these experiments. I said, wow, this is deeper than I thought. And then I learned about James Randi and his Randi Prize and the CSI COP organization that fights so hard to limit parapsychology. And I said, well, this isn't right because, if all of us have it, and if we can actually look at other dimensions through mediumship, I think physicists would benefit from this. I think neurobiologists would benefit from this. I think people who've lost a loved one would benefit from this. People who've experienced weird stuff, like out-of-body experiences or, precognitive dreams, and they think they're crazy. They're not crazy. It's not right that the scientific community says that to people. It's very frustrating. So I said, well, I'm going to start talking about this. And I did write a book, but it wasn't the book I intended. It's a young adult fiction about a 15-year-old whose mother is a carnival medium. And she's learned at her knee how to do the mentalism instead of actual psychic ability. And she makes this transition. A lot of mentalists do, believe it or not, go from being a mentalist to being a telepath just through tapping into that skill set they didn't realize they had, but that everybody seems to. So young people, especially, have these events happen to them, like the psychokinesis we call poltergeist effect, may actually be what we call living living agent psi. A young person, especially, not necessarily, but it seems to be the case, they go through a real stressful time and they don't realize it and they can't control it, but they're throwing things around or they're affecting electronics. And we just had a case, Lloyd Auerbach, one of the people who does discarnate research or poltergeist research, had a family desperately wanting this all to stop. And he's helped them out with that alongside a psychologist who helped the whole family kind of integrate and work through this issue with this young lady who was obviously a psychokinetic and didn't know it. They don't want their names out there. They don't want fame. They would rather just go back to their lives and not remember it. So if you think they're trying to get something out of this, like a magazine article, not the case here. So when young people are going through this, and young people may start being mediums. They might see discarnates at the end of their bed and go to mom and dad and say, so, yeah, I saw Aunt Lois. I know she died a couple years ago. And parents who don't know how to cope with it. And they said, no, we don't talk about that. That was your imagination. That was just your dream. So many of these mediums just quietly go through life trying to deal with this when they really should be taught.
Yeah.
This is what's going on. This is how you deal with it, and you could probably use it to help people.
Yeah. And that's definitely the story of my sister,
Hmm.
right? She was seeing things when she was younger, and my parents dismissed it until they started experiencing things, and they're like, oh, there's something going on here. But
Hmm.
you had just mentioned something that brought back a memory of when my sister and I were teenagers, and I don't remember what was going on. But we were both very upset about something, and we were sitting in my room, and I used to have this like disco ball hanging from a ceiling fan. The fan was not on, but we were really upset, and it just starts whipping around like crazy.
Mm.
And that was a time where we were both like, what is going on here? But I've always thought that. I'm like, I think that was our energy, like because we were upset about something and
Yeah,
it was having an effect on the physical.
yeah, you guys are probably very talented, and if you had been in the proper place, maybe with a shaman or in a spiritual church of that nature, they could have guided you. And
Hmm.
that's what I'm talking about. Why I wrote for young people. If, the adults in the room don't know how to cope with it, they need to have somewhere to go to get this information. The psychic experiencers group at Rhine, what you're doing, several podcasts that I'm familiar with, they're trying to get that out there for people. Um, and I think we've forgotten a lot of what we used to be able to do before Christianity became the prime Western religion and Islam became the prime Eastern religion. I think they didn't want us to have this ability to give us way too much agency, and they wanted to have some level of control over. So I'm not saying the religions did, I'm saying governments did, and they used religion as their puppet, if you will.
Hmm.
Um, and there's so much value to being together in a spiritual place and praying and meditating together. But when you insert other aspects that I don't think actually fit, for instance, taking the feminine out of religion and taking nature out of the religion, you've removed two of the three pillars of spirituality. Um, so I think, have lost some skill sets that we used to have. I don't think it was bred out of society. I think the witch trials basically, I would call it a level of genocide
Hmm.
of removing hyper talented shaman and psychics. What we did to the first people of America is an example, trying to push them away if they couldn't integrate within Christian quote unquote society. Um, and then trying to put them in these schools where the children were forced to learn the Christian or white prevalent society, and they were losing so much of what was rich about their native belief systems. And we've lost it. I think it's coming back. I think our interest in it is coming back. But so much of what's happening in the world, this feeling like we're lost. Even though we're amongst other people, we don't feel the connection to them as like we used to. We don't feel the connection to our world, and we don't feel the connection to our agency, the psychic agency that we have. And so you've lost so much time not knowing what you had, and so many other people are losing touch with what makes us, I think, human. It's not our bodies, certainly are more like our spirit. That's what survives, right?
Hmm.
So normalizing this and having this conversation again about what we've lost and what we can get back, the people we need to look to, the first people of Africa, of the Americas, of shamanism came from Siberia. There was a level of shamanism in North Europe through the Viking societies and Nordic societies. If we could reach back to that, Australia, let's not forget about, those folks are holding desperately onto what they've got. And I want to give them more chances to do it, to really keep touch of that. But if we can just go back to that, I
Mhm.
think we would heal again. I think we could heal our planet from the climate change and from raping it of its natural resources, restoring the animal populations that are dying off. So I think that it's incredibly important that we do that. That's why I speak about it. I'm willing to take the hits.
No, I mean it's really interesting to think about how much it touches, right? It's not
Mhm.
just oh, I can do cool things or predict cool things like you're saying. It's like it's our connection with nature, it's our connection with people and how our governments are run. So I mean, I think you're making really valuable points and I'm grateful that you are talking about this. We need more people to talk about it.
think that
How
a lot of
oh sorry.
people don't really think about, maybe they don't want to think about, maybe they don't realize up until about 200 years ago, 250 years ago, your government and your religion were the same thing. At least in any anything that came from Europe, anything that came from most of the basically anything that there would be a colonizing effect in the world. There was no separation of church and state. So it was the governments that were eradicating those things, but it was also their religion because the government controlled the religion, and then the religious leaders also controlled the government. So those things really do go hand in hand. It's very recent idea that a government would not also be the same part of the state sanctioned religion. And a lot, I agree, a lot of things have been lost for sure. Um, it's There's a lot of tragedy out there.
Well, I'd like to bring hope back to our discourse, um, because there's a lot to be hopeful for. We've got, we don't end here. That's one great hope. You know, we might not be in this corporeal being any longer, but we don't stop here. So that, like I said, that's a great hope that I get to try, again or experience again another place. That's one thing that I think mediumship and near-death experiences and what UVA does, University of Virginia Perceptive Studies does, looking at reincarnation, especially in the East. Those are all coming together to give us evidence, and it's pretty compelling, So I'm feeling pretty comfortable with that.
Mhm.
Um, and that's one thing. Another thing, the discarnates tell us about in some of the books when you read the mediumships is that we decided to come here and we had a purpose for coming here. Um, we don't have to necessarily be unique, uh, but just having a purpose, knowing we have a reason that we're working on something and that we're so connected to each other. I feel a whole lot more love for other people, a lot less frustration, a lot less anger. And I thought to myself, if we could just all do this. Jeffrey Mishleff, he says, love everybody all the time. That's what
Mhm.
he says. I said, wow, yeah, that's hard. But you say that mantra to
Mhm.
yourself, love everybody all the time. Eventually it comes true. It becomes a habit,
Mhm.
and if everybody did it, we wouldn't need police or the military or the Navy. We'd just say, oh, well, you're my brother, you're my sister in spirit, and, you know, let's just get through this. I know we don't have the same viewpoint about something, but that's what makes this interesting is we can talk about it. I don't have to hate you. I just have a difference of opinion. But that is another thing that it's teaching us, the sheer connection that we've lost that we need to regain, not just with each other, but like I said, with our planet, you know.
I love that viewpoint. I'm with you. Love
Yeah.
everybody all the time.
Oh, he
I
is
love it.
Jeffrey Mishlev does the New Thinking Aloud Foundation. I do recommend
Okay.
it to your listeners
Okay.
because I learned a lot from him. He is an incredibly lovely human being, so
Mhm.
inclusive. Um, and he's been doing this for since the 90s. So now it's on YouTube. You can watch them. And he speaks to not just parapsychologists, but a whole lot of other very interesting people. And every single one of those, including Whitley Strieber, your friend Whitley Strieber, he speaks to everybody, and every single episode will blow your mind. And he said, "Nah, that can't be true." And then you say, "Okay, well, what if it is?"
Hmm.
And right. So I do recommend it to a lot of the seekers out there because there's so much information from that organization. Um, the other organization is IONS, uh, the Institute of Noetic Science. They do a lot more of the laboratory research than basically taken over from the Rhine for that. Um, the book Real Magic, that's a very good book for people to look up. And then we have the Windbridge Institute out of California. Um, Dr. Judy Beischel and her husband, Mark Bacuzzi, have been looking at mediumship. And that's another thing that blew my mind. Reading her book about the research she did is a quintuple blind study of mediumship, just to make sure they weren't faking it. So basically, the sitters had never met with a medium. The medium just gets a name. The researcher doesn't know the name that the medium's getting. The medium does a reading without ever meeting the sitter. And then the sitter looks at three different stories, chooses the story that most matches the discarnate they're they asked about. And then another researcher decides whether that medium and that story match that sitter. It's crazy how much work they put into trying to make sure this didn't fake. And there's incredible numbers of accurate readings. So they take these folks and they put them in the Family First Foundation, and they read for people who've lost loved ones, and they give so much guidance and closure that the people they've lost aren't gone; they're just somewhere else. So that kind of stuff is so fascinating to me. They do more in the UK. It's more acceptable in the UK. They do a lot more in Brazil. Brazil has a big psychic healing organization down there. Um, but it, the sad thing is all of psychology spends about in a month what parapsychology has in 137 years. So that's how
Um,
much funding is missing in parapsychology. If we had
mhm,
more funding, especially from institutes of health or
mhm,
other government foundations, we could do so much more. We'd integrate with the physicists and the neuroscientists and the biologists, and human evolution would go leaps and bounds from there if we could do that. So, but that's what we're
as-
working with right now.
yeah. Aside from lack of funding, I mean, I feel like there's a lot of people in the scientific community who are just very dismissive of this stuff. Would you agree with that? And if so, why do you think that is?
I see that there are closet believers in the science community, and I grew up with a field biologist, and my uncle was a chemist for Jet Propulsion Laboratory back when they were trying to make the Mars shot. Um, so it's not like I'm unaware of the scientific method and how it all works. Um, Science is a process, but it's also a human endeavor. And what you'll find is there are people rather entrenched in their dogma of what they think. So if you have a basis for your knowledge, well, apparently parapsychology messes with that basis, and so they feel like they would have to throw everything they knew away and start from scratch. I disagree, but that's how they're feeling. They're feeling very much like everything they learned, everything they wrote about, everything that they're an expert on would be gone, washed away. It's a frightening prospect, but they forget science is the process. Sometimes you're going to go down the wrong road, like Lord Kelvin did with his temperature range.
Mm-hmm.
Now we use Celsius because he was wrong about some stuff, but that's okay because you have to do the wrong thing and then go back and start going a different direction to fight the right thing.
Yeah.
So it's okay for everything you worked on to maybe not necessarily be correct, but I think there's something to be said for string theory and the way that maybe consciousness fits in to the vibrations of the strings and the frequency. Because when I'm reading this information, they often talk about frequency as an issue with why they can't communicate easily with us and vice versa. So there's something to be said. Maybe if we had a discarnate discuss this with a physicist, they could actually start studying this a little bit more. But it doesn't throw everything into the trash. It really doesn't. And we just don't have the scientific instruments to study this yet. And we won't until they actually admit to it. Yes, there are a lot of people who are closet believers in parapsychology. They have seen the effects, but they have to kind of put it in the top drawer because the people who give us the money don't want to hear it.
Mm-hmm.
So until we as a society push back against that dogma of skepticism or the fear that everything would be washed away, when we push against it, when we bring everything we know to bear, and we're getting there, the government's saying, yes, there are UFOs, right?
Right.
The government spent 20 years on remote viewing.
Mm-hmm.
They're starting to come around. When we see the government starting to put money into it, like I said, the National Institutes of Health putting money into shamanism or into stuff like that. And I work for a hospital and I'm starting to see more shamanistic Reiki work coming into
Mm-hmm.
this hospital. It's a top 10 hospital. So we're seeing it, it's
Mm-hmm.
coming. And you have to reach that tipping point. And when the tipping point is reached, then we can go to the scientist that, yeah, I always thought there was something there. Now I can work on it in earnest. So I don't blame them. It's always been like that. I mean, if you think about viewing something through a telescope and saying that the Earth is not the center of the universe, and well, you could be put to death via burning for that.
Right.
At least, the only thing they would lose is tenure. you know. So um, that I have hope that we're pushing in that correct direction. We just have to keep at it and not
Yeah.
give up. Um, and if we could just, the dogmatic skeptics that we've got out there aren't doing us any favors, and they aren't doing themselves any favors. And I wish they would just keep it to themselves and not break down the Wikipedia page for, parapsychology and call it a pseudoscience. It's not. It's not.
Mm-hmm.
It's valuable data and it's tight data.
Yeah.
So
That experiment you just talked about, it's like you can't get more scientific than that method,
no, no,
quadruple blind study. Like,
yeah,
yeah,
yeah, you can't.
you can't
Uh,
fake that.
nope. No, it's out of the mouths of mediums. That's the book. It's on Amazon. You can read it, and it will, like I said, change your mind about what mediums are capable of doing.
I have to check that one out.
It's short. It is basically the prose from the study. So she breaks it down so that an average person can understand what the study did. So it's not long.
What do you believe happens after we die?
Oh, funny you should ask. Going to be speaking to a professor named Stafford Betty, who made it his life's work to look at the other side. So he looked at mostly Eastern religions. He's written several books. The one I'm going to be discussing is called Guardians of the Afterworld, which is a fictionalized rendition of what he thinks it looks like. Um, it's not much different. The level that we would go to next is slightly bureaucratic. We still hold on to many of the aspects of our earthly existence because it takes a little time to get over it. But what's different is that we experience time in a linear fashion. But apparently, on the other side, many things are written about this. Time seems to be block time. It doesn't seem to be linear. Um, we can create and work with matter so we can manipulate it and make things happen. Uh, One of them, if you read the Skull Experimenters group, a lot of scientists from the other side were trying to work with a group of sitters on this side to create a way, a portal basically for the other side to speak to us. So they were doing a lot of experiments. It was so cool to read. And they have like 700 objects that appeared in front of these people. They have videotape and film and all kinds of other evidence. Uh, People came and watched this whole thing happen, and they said there's no way they could have faked it. We couldn't make it 100% because it wasn't in a laboratory, but they did as best they could to make it seem there's nobody's faking this. Nobody is using ledger domain here. So that was
Is
a
that a
very
book as
interesting.
well?
Yes, Skull Experimenters Group is in a book form. Um, I do recommend it to people if they're interested in what happens to us. But they say that, yeah, we can kind of maneuver things around here just with thought. So pure thought means that we can manipulate matter and energy. And I think to myself, well, given the stories about shaman being able to change from human form into animal form, maybe we can do that. We've just forgotten how. Like I
Mm-hmm.
said, so much of what we forgot. And we've just called it myth, you
Mm-hmm.
know. Maybe it's not myth.
Right.
And maybe this UFO stuff that's going on now is terribly similar to what Odin did. You know, you talk about owls, John. Well, Odin showed up as an owl sometimes, you know?
Interesting.
So maybe if we look back at the past, at these stories of people experiencing life the way they understood it, but these fascinating and weird things happened to them, and it just became mythical, we might be able to see some parallels to what we're experiencing now. Now we have greater technology, so we think of UFOs as a technological thing.
Mm-hmm.
But I like to keep an open mind. I think, maybe they're making us see it
Mm-hmm.
in a way we would understand it now.
Mm-hmm.
And it's not actually happening in reality, or maybe it's partial reality, partial perception, you know, who knows? I like to keep an open mind about it. I put all the possibilities down and not just centralize on one. Um, but the other thing is people experience greater connection. They begin to understand why they exist. Um, and hell is not a place where you're being punished by somebody else. Hell is your own belief that you should be, or that you can't integrate into the other side, that you're still caught up with earthly things like power
Mm-hmm.
or money or sex or drugs or alcohol or gambling, and you can't stop. So that's the hell you create for yourself. You don't advance as a spirit form to higher and higher levels of existence. Um, so the astral planes apparently do get more and more advanced. where people get farther and farther away from human existence, places where people don't even know what language is because they just simply have thought. So it's kind of cool to know that you can go to all these nifty places and be basically a semi-deity, but that you could also affect people here on Earth. You could still have some level of connection with your family. You're not lost from your family.
Hmm.
So it's so hopeful and
Yeah,
exciting.
very interesting. You've brought up shamans a couple of times. Can you tell our listeners, like, what exactly are you talking about when it comes to a shaman?
Oh, this is a new study for me, so you'll have to forgive me, all those shaman out there that might be listening if I get it if I get it incorrect, but I am learning about it. I would say the medicine man or the spirit guide, earthly spirit guide, would be the best definition of a shaman. I believe the word originated in the Siberian area of Russia, um, and that there are many paths that a person can take. But what is common is that are um, they might be diagnosed as schizophrenic here right now. But what they're trying to do is integrate the experiences from the spirit realm into their mind, into their own spirit. That's my understanding. But their purpose in their society was to heal, not necessarily the body, but the hurt, the damage that we have from life to life to life, or maybe that our family had, or maybe our society had. Let's look at the Holocaust. They actually can see the epigenetic effects on offspring of Holocaust survivors. There's actual psychic trauma. So they might be able to do something to heal that epigenetic or psychic trauma, and in so doing heal the entire society, since we're connected. Since we've lost that, we're fracturing as a society, as a world society. Um, and it's evident if you think about it. If you don't have people that can work with that healing, that can guide you to your path spiritually, then you don't know what you're supposed to do,
Mhm.
you know? And then you drink or you use drugs or
Yeah.
you find other things to salve that wound, if you will. And the kids now that need, you know, I went to my son's college as a freshman and I saw these people with the comfort animals with them. And I said, oh my goodness, we're raising kids to be so fragile, but it's not just that. They feel the fracture and they
Mhm.
don't know how to heal it. They don't
Yeah.
know what to do.
Yeah.
So it's more to it. So that's basically who we're missing in our society. And I'm hoping that through this acceptance, we'll get some more folks who realize their potential through guiding spiritual guides or spiritual healers in our society, and that people come to them and say, okay, I need something. And that person says, okay, well, you've got some sort of an addiction, and I think what you got is a hanger on. So let's see if we can't get them off of you, and let's see why this happened in the first place, and we'll get you all whole again. That's what we need, you know?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
I I'm a holistic therapist, so I'm
Hmm.
a licensed clinical social worker, but I'm also a Reiki master teacher and I work on the Akashic records. And I would say in the last few years, and maybe I'm biased because I market myself as this, as that I'm a holistic practitioner. Um, but I feel like I find more people are interested in that type of
Yeah.
healing where
Yeah.
they're like, don't want to just talk about my problems. I want to get to kind of the energetic and spiritual root of it.
Mm-hmm.
So that gives me hope of, I feel like it is becoming more accepted, ever since I did my Reiki training. I know
Mm-hmm.
lots and lots more people who go
Mm-hmm.
through that kind of
Mm-hmm.
training, or people who are
Mm-hmm.
more interested in, even just things like reading tarot cards, right?
Yeah.
Like
Yeah.
so you're shaking your head. So I feel like you're agreeing, like it is starting to become more accepted in our society.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Well, like I said, when you get a major medical institution willing to
Mm-hmm.
consider these more Eastern philosophies
Mm-hmm.
or the older philosophies, or you know what? We know that medicine can't fix everything, but what
Right.
we have seen is if people believe that somebody else can do this, then they heal.
Yeah.
Doctors have seen it. Doctors watch this all the time.
Yep.
Right? It's not just the placebo effect, it's the ability of the body and the spirit to heal if it has the right path to do so, if there's nothing impeding it. So, I've been in medicine for over 30 years, and they know about 20%. I'm going to be honest with you.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, they know the easy stuff, like the strep
Mm-hmm.
throat, right? But the hard stuff, like I just lost my hearing in my left ear, and I had lost it 7 years ago in my right. I'm going to a doctor and says, well, we can try some corticosteroids. And that's about it. I said, really? You're not even going to try and find out what happened? You know?
Yeah.
And so everybody gets a little desperate to say, well, I can't go through life like this. I need to find some pathway. So they find people like you who can do this and go to you and say, I want to fix this, and the doctor is throwing their hands up and giving up on me, and the medicine isn't working. So let's try something.
Yeah.
Um, and because we have less structure in our society than we used to, that's one benefit to it. People feel more comfortable going to another person. It used to be the Christian church would say, nope, that's a witch, right? And we burn them. So you can't go. But now more and more people have lost, um, I won't say faith in the church, but the church has become too political. And so they're not finding it's not working on the spiritual level as it used to. So they're looking for something. Um, and I think the Reiki healers now may be the shaman of the past.
Mm-hmm.
You know, I do.
I agree with that.
Yeah. So that means that everybody's coming back full circle to what we need.
Yeah.
And
You had mentioned that you had participated in some experiments at the
Mhm.
Rhine.
Yeah.
So tell us about some of the experiments you were a part of.
So has anybody here heard of Gonsfeld?
No.
No.
Don't think so.
So Gonsfeld is one of the newer ways that parapsychologists are studying psychic ability. You basically go into a quiet room. You might put on earphones that are playing white noise. You'll see some pictures with the half golf balls over the eyes, but what they do now is they basically shine a red light. And they're thinking that that puts you in a meditative state, the beta waves or theta waves that you want to be in to be receptive. And in my case, what they were doing is putting me in this Gonsfeld room, and in another room, a video was playing, and I was just free expression, talking in a microphone. Yeah, this is what I think I'm seeing in my mind. And then he would evaluate what I was saying to whether it matched the video. Then we did 6 weeks of meditation, and this was meditation, not there's different kinds, transcendental meditation. This was uh, you were trying to actually tell yourself to accomplish a goal.
Hmm.
So he said, okay, you want to start at the top of your head and go through your entire body and force every muscle into a state of relaxation. So you do that for about 10 minutes, and you want to do it in the most comfortable place you can, both arms on the arms of the chair, both feet flat on the floor, leaning back, comfortable, and just completely relax the body. And then you want to create that intention. What do I want to do with this meditation? And then you think about it through the meditation. And as you learn how to do that over the 6 weeks, the next thing we would do is go back into the Gonsfeld room with a different video playing in the room and see if we got better at identifying what was on the video. So that was the experiment I went through. And the other one was to see if I could cause psychokinetic effects on a computer because I got frustrated with the computer. So the software did things to make you feel like you had failed the question, right? Except I knew exactly what was happening. So I was like, I'm sorry, I'm a bad subject for this experiment because I was just laughing at it, knowing precisely what the computer was doing. He goes, yeah, I need to factor that into my experiment, the people who know they're being messed with and they aren't upset. So you have to find a particular personality type, somebody who's rather competitive, for instance, and put them in the room with that. I'm not a competitive, that's why it didn't really work. But I said, you find that competitive person, maybe the football team at Duke and have them come in and do this, right? But he was trying to see in the background, something was running to see if they were above the mean for psychokinetic ability. And I didn't get to see that part, so I wasn't sure what it was. But that was the other experiment. Now, he also works with biophotons. We went into this very dark room, and there's this photomultiplier that picks some photons, very small levels of them, which is light, basically. He would bring people in who were practitioners like you, and he would have them just relax in the room and quietly, it's dark in here. I'm bored. He said, okay, go ahead and do what you do when you're doing Reiki or when you're doing your psychokinesis or when you're doing your mediumship. And he would measure the biophotons when they're actually doing whatever it was they're doing. So in cases like Ed Edwards, who was a psychokinetic I was talking about before, his biophotons are through the roof. They're like spiking everywhere. So I said, oh my gosh, this is so important because this tells physicists, right?
Yeah.
Hey, there's a physical effect you can study.
Yep.
Here you go. you know, but he's looking at that stuff and he's been taking his research on the road to the different parapsychology organizations in the different parts of the world and discussing it, so people can repeat the experiment in their own labs. So stuff like that. It was very nifty.
Yeah, that is awesome. I'm so glad that this work is being done, and I'm so glad that you're out here talking about it.
Mhm.
Where do you feel like the field of parapsychology needs to go next?
Parapsychology's done all it can with just parapsychologists and
Okay.
psychologists. As I said, the next step is to find, I hate to say this, wealthy people
Mm,
who can be, what's the word they used to have for artists?
benefactor.
Something like that. Yeah.
Yeah.
Um, who can bring this, like I said, to the big physical science and say, here's some money, study it. Or I was thinking like big tobacco did, basically throw a whole lot of information out there to people to tell them about, and I know that's evil. Trust me, I know, but it was effective.
Yeah.
Um, and bringing knowledge to people that this is being studied, it's legitimate. Whatever you've heard, it's people that are scared of it. Um, so if we could just spread the word in a more media savvy way, and then the scientists who have seen these effects feel more comfortable studying it, and parapsychologists then become the source for what they've seen, the effects, and the decline effect that Rhine saw, um, the kind of feeling you need in the room, the fact that as an experimenter, you can have an effect on the experiment. So you have to know all of this stuff walking into a room, dealing with it. So what would you build? So we need to talk to physicists. What would you build to study this effect? And go to the neurobiologist. What would you look at if you knew this is how the brain has to be to pick up psychic ability, right? Go to the geologist and say, well, these people on the other side are telling us there are actual pillars of energy coming out of the earth. Is Stonehenge one of those? How would you find out? So instead of being woo-woo, this could be the source material for the advancement of science. Because the way they're looking at it now from purely materialistic viewpoint, it ain't going anywhere.
Yeah.
The Webb telescope is breaking some long-held beliefs about the expansion of the universe. It's not expanding, uniformly.
Mm-hmm.
So now they're shaking their heads and scratching their temples and going, well, what's going on here? I said, well, maybe if you go back to prior to Newton and let's reintegrate consciousness into the whole, the primacy of science. It's the basis of energy and matter. It's the software that runs it all. Okay, then maybe we can work with that and we can develop the scientific experiments to do that. So it's not that parapsychologists need to do any more proving that this stuff happens. We need to now be partners in
Mm-hmm.
an integrated scientific group. So that's the next step. And I think we can only do that, like I said, by making society feel more comfortable with it and accepting that it's there in the
Yeah,
first place. So
that makes a whole lot of sense to me. Have you had any personal experiences with disincarnate or psychic abilities?
yes, nothing like you. No, mine are very mild, everyday things. I tell people I'm not particularly psychic, um, but I have the everyday experiences that people have. I just pay attention.
Mm-hmm.
And the time I was still involved heavily with my church in San Diego, I was dating my husband at the time. He was living in a house with four other people. It was a 5-bedroom mansion. And I was praying and meditating a lot. And as a result, I was in connection with the spirit world. I just wasn't aware of it because as a Christian, you aren't aware like you should be.
Mm-hmm.
But we were up in the bedroom and the moon was out and it was really nice and we were quiet and I felt something. And I go to my husband, I shook him, I said, Brian, there's something in the house. And he wakes up a little bit. He goes, it's just a cow. What are you talking about? It's no big deal. It's just, the spirit uh equivalent of a cow walking through the house. And the roommate across the hall, he was having a lot of emotional problems. And he was actually dating my husband's ex-wife.
Oh, wow.
So you can imagine things were a little
Uh-huh.
bit tense. But I felt like I could stand at the doorway and look at the darkened room and see two red eyes in the corner. I felt like it. It's not like I actually saw them, but I felt like it. And so, we would laugh about it and say it was the Amityville House of San Diego. That's called it the Amityville House from that point on, because it was just everybody had um, hyper emotional effects happening to them. They were just not feeling comfortable there. You know what I'm saying? I
Yeah.
certainly didn't. Um, so that happened. And I just felt very sensitive to people growing up, what they were feeling, very sensitive to what they were feeling, not necessarily hearing their thoughts per se. Um, I did go see a baseball game and see the grand slam before it happened just beforehand. But that's little things, I just
Little flashes. Yeah.
little things. But if you are like me, not particularly talented psychic wise, you can still tap into it. Say, pay attention to the synchronicities, ask for signs.
Yep.
For me, I say 3 things to tell me what you want me to do or should do. Just, I'm not that bright 3 times. So I tell people, go ahead and ask for it. Oh, I do have a story. Laura Lynn Jackson is a medium who's on the board of the Rhine, but she also is a best-selling author about her mediumship. She's extremely talented. She gave a talk at the Rhine one night. She says, so I want you to think of a number you wouldn't normally see. I want you to think of a song that you wouldn't normally hear. And I want you to think of a crazy animal. Like I thought of a winged otter that you wouldn't normally see. So the number I thought of was the license plate on my car before we changed the license plate to uh, a different license. Then I thought of the song Long Way Home. And then I thought of a winged otter. So time goes by. I'm in Denver. We're held there for about 6 hours due to weather. We're on the gangway, and the man in front of me starts to sing Long Way Home. And so I get home, and I have this video, the digital picture screen. I promise you, I had not seen this picture for many years, and it flashed up. My son was standing behind the car with that license plate number on it. And then one of my artist friends had painted for me an otter that had a butterfly on its nose.
Wow.
I said, "Oh my gosh, this is so cool." And the other podcast I listen to is WTF Just Happened. And she talks about wanting to get messages from her father, and what came to her were feathers or pennies in her case, but some people wanted feathers. So if you're trying to reach that person from the other side, they said the easiest thing to get the attention of are insects or birds, or ask for an object to be where it normally shouldn't be. And that person on the other side will work very diligently to get that message to you. So that's what I'm talking about. The synchronicities in your life, looking for messages, guidance. It still happens. People call it prayer. If you need to call it prayer, go for it. I don't care. Just ask. Believe in your own agency, your own power, that you're a spiritual being, that you're connected to everybody, and enlightenment will come, in my opinion. So, like I said, I'm not particularly good at this. I just think it's fascinating stuff. So.
It is fascinating stuff. And no, your stories are good for sure. So thank you very much for sharing them with us.
Sure.
You brought up that you have written a book. Please tell us the name of that book and where we can buy it.
I'll show it to you. I know it's not going to be on video, but this is it right here. It's a young adult fiction called Calliope O'Callahan and the Psy Syndicate. Psy is spelled Psy, by Tantlian, which is my nom de plume, Tantlian. It's available on most platforms, and the print version is also available on demand.
Oh, I'm supposed to be in a book buying band, but I think we're gonna make an exception, right, Jonathan?
Yeah, absolutely.
It's totally up
Thank you
my
so
Check it
much.
alley.
out.
Well, yeah, I tried to make this accessible for young people as much as possible. There's no drugs, there's no sex, there's no alcohol. This is
Hmm.
just straight up, what kids get into, what they're feeling, uh, the changes that are going on in their lives and stuff like that. So, I wanted very much to help kids with
Yeah.
this. There's not a lot out there parapsychology wise for kids. There's a lot of paranormal for older people,
Yeah.
but it doesn't really discuss. This is actual evidential information in here. It's not just paranormal. This is stuff that I have read about.
Hmm.
So it could have happened to anybody.
Yep.
Yeah. So that's what's a little different about it than other paranormal books. But
Yep.
as I said, the most important thing about this to me is that this little baby gets out in the world, people get from it something they need. You know,
Yep.
that's what matters the most. So,
Well, I feel like the work that you're doing and the work, the people at the Rhine Center and other organizations you've talked about is, like I said before, it's very important. It is destigmatizing something that all of us experience at some time in our
yeah,
life and that
yes.
all of us could expand upon, So thank you for the work that you're doing.
And I appreciate the work you're doing. I really do. Letting people have a platform where they feel safe talking about this. We need more people like you guys. And I hope that you can continue to do it. And we'll do whatever we can to support you.
Well, thank you
Thank you
so
very much.
much.
You're
Really
very welcome.
appreciate that.
I certainly hope you guys will join us over at the Rhine for different events. We have lots of different Zoom events.
Awesome.
One's coming up on Wednesday where we're going to talk about kids who can read without using their eyes. They're
That's
blindfolded.
interesting.
That's
Yes.
cool. Yeah.
So really fascinating stuff. You'll go down the rabbit hole with me and I won't feel so alone. But yeah, I'm going to a couple different conventions this year locally to me. Virginia, North Carolina, South Carolina, and just talking to fans about stuff they already read that they think is just fantasy. And I said, no, this is for
Yeah.
real.
Cool.
So
I love it.
yeah,
Very, very cool. Yeah, we will definitely check out some of those events and we'll link it in our show notes so that other people can check them out as well.
that'd be great.
Definitely.
Thank you so much.
You're welcome. Well, thank you so much for taking the time to talk to us
Oh
today.
yeah,
Really appreciate it.
yeah, it's been great. Thank you so
Oh
much.
yeah. Thank you very much.
Absolutely. Thank you so much for being here. If you have a strange story you want to share with us, email us at seekerandskeptic@gmail.com. We look forward to talking to you soon.